if the enemy is not going to do it to you,
So
it's
is that a Quran verse? Sorry, I don't know what
yeah,
you're
it's a
talking
Quranic verse. So the Quranic verse in Surah Al-Baqarah,
about.
it says that if the enemy does this, you can do this to them as well.
Okay, what can we look at that?
Yeah, we can look at that. Some, by the way, some terrorists have used this verse, and that is, by the way, just to let you know something. That's one of the adillah, or one of the evidences that Al-Qaeda use. They say, well, hold on, the enemy is killing our innocents, so let's kill their innocents. But we say that the problem with that reasoning, with this particular mas'ala, or that particular issue, is that Prophet Muhammad has already said you can't kill the women and children.
Right.
You see what I'm trying to say? So you can't use a general ruling to abrogate a specific one. You can only use a specific ruling, not to abrogate it, but to do takhsis. In other words, to elucidate on what the general ruling is.
Would it be fair to say that you are using analogy or qiyas to say that because of this Quranic kind of teaching, it should be applied to the issue of slavery?
No, it's not, because qiyas, you have to have maqis and maqis alayhi, yeah? So you have to have that which is the hukum, and then you have to have the illah, and then you have to, which is the effective causative reasoning, and then you have to implement it on something else. But when there's two mafhums of a verse. There's a mafhum al-mantuq and mafhum al-mukhalafa. The mafhum mantuq of the verse is the implied meaning of it. I'm talking about here the general understanding of the verse, unless there's a mukhassis. A mukhassis means a specifier. So for example, in the case of killing the innocents, yes? Killing the innocents, this verse, had it been the only thing that was in existence, then the Al-Qaeda people would have an argument, because they will say, well, they're killing our innocents. The verse says we can do to them what we do to them, what they do to us. Therefore, we're going to kill their innocents. However, you have clear verses in the Quran and the Sunnah which says you can't kill the non-combatant. Man qatala mu'ahad, the hadith says, "Man qatala mu'ahadan lam yarih ra'ihat al-jannah." Whoever kills a non-combatant non-believer, he will never smell the fragrance of paradise. Or the verse where it says, "La yanhakum Allah an alladhina lam yuqatilukum fi ad-din," chapter 60, verse 8. You can't kill the people who don't kill you back, and so on.
No, the same verse, Surah Baqarah, verse 190, 190, was the same verse that says, attack them back how they attacked you.
Yes.
It's the same verse that says, do not transgress. And the word transgress.
And don't transgress. Very good, yeah. وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا, yeah. And don't transgress the bounds. So that transgression is mentioned. So the question is, if you have a situation where the institution of slavery is effectively illegal in all of the other enemy territories, can you reintroduce it? That's the question. Now, this question, jurists, that came way before the modern era, before liberalism, before anything. This is not an apologetic approach. This is the approach of medieval scholars who looked at the nusus, the textual evidences, and came to this conclusion based on what all of the nusus, or the textual evidences, are pushing us towards.
Many of those scholars bought slaves themselves, though.
Yes, they bought slaves, but remember, they did so in an area where there was already slavery. There was no abolition movement.
Okay.
Yes, so we're talking about today. That's what you said, right? We were talking about in today's context. So what I'm saying to you is, in today's context, where there have been legal abolitions, like in 1807 in England, in 1867 in America, and so on, and the majority of the world, I think almost all the world now, has agreed that slavery should be outlawed. In that context is a different context to the medieval context, which already had slaves everywhere.
Okay.
And in that there will be two rulings. That context has a ruling, and this context has a ruling. Yeah.
Okay.
So, for example, you know gun laws in America, yeah? Why don't they abolish the buying of guns?
I don't know.
Why? Because
To defend themselves, they think they should have the right to bear arms. But that's another issue.
No, it relates perfectly, actually. You know why?
Okay.
Because the thing is, if you look at gun laws, how many people get killed in America
A lot.
by these mass shootings? Yeah. So why do they not abolish is it the Second Amendment? What is
Second
it?
Amendment,
Yeah, why don't they abolish it?
There are various reasons
because
for
you
it.
know why there will be riots. People, they're not going to give up their guns. So at the time of the Prophet slavery, it wasn't something that was introduced like this. You're going to get rid of it like that.
Yeah, I
That's why
explained this to him. Yeah.
So exactly, do you not see the correlation where in today's time, where we're living today, where they can see mass people in slavery,
Yes.
at least people where the Prophet would treat them right, he clothed them how he clothed them, yeah? Here people are dying at the hands of people who own guns, yeah, not all of them, but they do not abolish it. Why? Because people will start causing riots.
Okay, but
You know what I'm trying to say? Do you not see it? It's
well,
not
the
that
thing
easy.
is,
And
there are other
yeah,
times
go on.
when people said like, oh, there needs to be a gradual introduction of a law like alcohol, for example.
Yes.
And yes, I don't see in the Quran things saying like slavery is from the devil, like they say about alcohol and gambling.
No, you're right. You're right.
There isn't that sort of.
Yeah.
There isn't a trajectory kind of clearly condemning it that I see in the Quran.
Yes, that's a valid point. I'll tell you why that's a valid. No, let me explain. No, you've made you're definitely saying something correct there. In essence, here's what we say, right? In essence, the interaction between person and person, okay, that can take different forms. Now, the thing is, the interaction I have with you right now is we're equals. Hopefully, according to the law and stuff like that. Obviously, I have a very,
To our society.
I have advantages. I'm joking. I'm sure you have, advantages as well. Now, the point I'm saying is that it's an equal relationship. Relationships in and of themselves, if they're based on, let's say for example, the Quran says, let me be completely honest about this, وَجَعَلْنَا بَعْضَهُمْ فَوْقَ بَعْضٍ دَرَجَاتٍ لِيَتَّخِذَ بَعْضَهُم بَعْضًا سِخْرِيًّا or سُخْرِيًّا. There's two qira'as. That we have allowed some people to be placed above and beyond other people, so that those individuals can take them as sukhriya, which means like, in other words, they can use them. Now, the idea is that is an allowance, a Quranic allowance. In the slavery or the relationship between slave owner and slave, let's say, or the indentured servant and the master, is as exploitative, arguably as exploitative as a relationship between an employee and an employer, depending on how that is framed.
Yeah, those are bad as well. Maybe you could call some of those factories slavery, okay? But in the UK, like to say like, oh no, you work for Coca-Cola or you work for
Not in the
Starbucks,
UK.
you're
I
a slave.
haven't made this thing about
Okay.
Starbucks being a
Okay.
slave.
Okay,
I'm
but
talking about.
some people might think you were talking about that.
No. So what I'm saying is that since the idea of an exploitative relationship ranges, yeah, the idea of that relationship itself depends on the interactions and the parameters. So if the interactions are inherently exploitative, then that is a bad relationship. That is a haram relationship. That's a wrong relationship. But in and of itself, the existence of a superior or an inferior or someone higher and lower, the Quranic discourse doesn't say that as a concept is a wrong thing, because I have more money than you. Because if you take that thought to its logical extreme, you do have Marxism. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Because if one says that the reason why slavery is wrong is because of the hierarchy between two people, right? Then if that is the ultimate reason why it's wrong,
I wouldn't make that argument.
right? But because there's a power dynamic between the two and there's a hierarchy, there's a higher and a lower. If that's the reason why it's wrong, we are saying it's wrong because of other reasons. Yes, because of the interactions.
Yes,
If that's the reason,
like slavery in general is wrong because
Because of the
your own
interaction,
person,
exploitations.
That person doesn't have freedom. That person doesn't have the right to.
but that's a
decide.
different.
But
Okay,
that's different. Slavery.
freedom. By the way, free.
Well, because the slave,
Because
the
you
slavery
can't
in
compare, the term is the same, but it's not the same thing.
no,
You get it?
the kind of slavery practice.
What comes to your mind
was
when
it,
you say
well, I mean, are you gonna? So are we going to talk about slavery in Islamic history or slavery according to what Muhammad did? Because sometimes you've gone to just what Muhammad did. Sometimes you talk to kind of like the rulings of medieval jurists. So within medieval
No, but
Islamic
the medieval
history,
jurists, they refer back to what the Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did.
but
They're just trying to find out what Muhammad did.
But it's not in itself like
That-
at most it's like a proxy though. It's not in itself kind of. I think if the central issue is what Muhammad did and what he said was okay, his teachings and
Yes.
so on, then
Yeah.
at that time, yeah. So at that time, like you would be someone who you could be ordered to do labor. If you're a slave belonging to someone, they could order you to do labor. And there's evidence of Muhammad
Yes.
doing that. He like told one of his slaves to carry luggage, for example, and also within Muhammad's time, you could buy and sell people, so they were your property. Okay, and so and that is like a violation of freedoms, and so I don't think we would call that, you know, merely like an employee
Okay,
relationship.
perfect. No, I agree. Now, that what you've done there, I've listened to what you're saying, and what you've employed really is a liberal framework. So in other words, for you, the best thing that you can have is freedom. And if those freedom,
that's not it.
Right. So if freedoms are transgressed,
freedom is one good thing.
no problem. But how can you prove that?
Do you really need to go there?
We really do, because that's your presupposition.
But before,
Yeah.
okay, but well, like before we go to like
There's two-
why are things
Can
good?
I explain something? Sorry, one thing. There's a liberal thinker called Nozick. I'm not sure if you've heard of him.
No, I haven't.
Nozick talks about freedom, okay? And the discussion of freedom is actually a deep intellectual academic one. My postulation today to you is that freedom as a concept has been abused, right? And it's not used in the correct way.
Okay.
Some in my opinion, that freedom that you're talking about doesn't actually even exist.
You don't know exactly what freedom I'm talking about.
All right. Okay. So what? Can you explain what freedom is? Yeah.
Like, so I'd say.
What is freedom?
Like, human rights, for example, would be a good example of like the human rights documents or that sort of thing.
Okay.
United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. That would be something that I have a large degree of agreement with. I wouldn't say that freedom is the ultimate good thing, or like we should achieve freedom beyond anything else. There are other good things that should be improved, like reducing human suffering.
What's freedom? What's the definition of freedom?
It's
Yes.
I can't remember. It'd be like lack of coercion, I guess.
Okay. Oh, brilliant. Self-determination.
Yeah.
What would you want? How do you want to define freedom?
I'd probably go along with how it's defined in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, if it is mentioned in there.
I don't think it is actually.
But without being able to specifically kind of point to one definition, I can say that like kind of this limitation of freedom by an owner, someone who owns someone and can like sell them as property and order them to do labor, that would be, you know, that would be bad because it violates people's human rights, violates their freedoms.
For me, okay, I'll be completely honest with you. In 1948, as you said, this new term, and it was a new term, of human rights was coined. Before that, the word natural law or natural rights was the common term that was used in academics and also written in books. If you go to Google Ngram and you write the words, Google Ngram is a really interesting tool, by the way.
That?
Yeah, so it shows you what the keywords in books are in different time periods from the 1800s. Yeah. So if you write down, and I urge people that are watching this as well to do the same thing, write down the phrase human rights on Google Ngram, you'll find that there's a spike in 1948 from when that term was used. Now, human rights as a concept, therefore, with all 30 articles as written in the convention, this is quite new, okay? Now, it would seem to be an egregious anachronism to use such a post-World War II kind of document to try and refer to medieval practices. I think that would be problematic.
But sometimes it seems like
now,
you say that you should go back. We should go back to. Sometimes it seems like you say that we should go back to these medieval practices, and then sometimes you say like, kind of, oh, now in this day and age, slavery shouldn't be legal. But when you say that, you're actually benefiting from the achievements that kind of liberal, humanist, and secularist thinkers and societies.
I think
have
you're wrong about that.
I
think no.
Coercing Muslim countries to stop slavery and to make slavery be
That's
abolished
absolutely
worldwide.
what you've said there is quite frankly ahistorical, because if you look at, for example, John Locke, John Locke, who talked against slavery in his books, The Two Treatises of Governments, he's a liberal, he's the founding father of liberalism, was in fact someone who was a colonial, he justified colonialism. And in fact, hold on, let me explain.
We aren't obliged to kind of defend any single person's entire corpus. But we don't follow a cult of personality. And we aren't obliged according to any sort of religious beliefs to try and justify any single person.
No problem.
We can say as a thinker has good ideas, and then
no problem.
And these are his
but
bad
what
ideas.
you said was that liberal people coerce Muslims to free slaves. What I'm telling you is
maybe they shouldn't be called liberals.
Let me correct you.
Let's call them the West.
No, let me correct you. Liberalism itself allowed slavery in abstraction, in conception, and in practice. And liberal governments from when America was established in 1776, all the way up until this time, have practiced slavery in the most racist way possible. So I don't know how you can say that now they forced us to say the free the slaves. It didn't work like
fair
that.
enough. Let's call it secular humanists.
So no,
then.
what I'm
you have
saying,
benefited from the work
no,
of secular
we
humanists.
we haven't benefited from anyone.
You
We,
have,
in fact, we've been the receiving end.
No, because
we've been the colonized.
Muslim countries wouldn't have abolished slavery until kind of the
but you're
until
confusing.
kind of Western powers started kind of pressuring and persuading other countries to abolish slavery.
But those
that's
Western
why Muslim
powers,
countries were so slow
those Western powers themselves justified slavery for hundreds
earlier in the time,
No, not only earlier in the time, they're continuing to justify it.
How can you justify it when you've abolished it legally?
Well, they continue to justify it. Well, even after the abolition in 1807 in this country and 1867 in America, do you think that the whole discussion was muted? Do you think that the whole discussion was muted?
So, are you saying
no?
that
What I'm saying
there
is
are American
you've
citizens who thought that slavery was a good thing?
You've used key terms and you've unjustifiably used them. You've used terms like liberal, secular, humanist. Now, I don't know why. Let's define those terms. Liberalism, okay? There's nothing inherent within liberalism which disallows slavery outright if a social contract would allow it, and or if there's an economic benefit to a particular nation, as was the case, as was justified by the Americas, and by those proponents of slavery within using the framework of liberalism.
No, there isn't like a book or a figure within liberalism who you can say this is the canon. Okay, so there'll be a range of opinions within liberalism.
I accept it, but what I'm saying to you is it's conceivable using liberal thought. My argument is as follows. It is as conceivable, and I want you to try and disprove this, it is as conceivable within liberalism, within humanism, and within secularism to justify slavery of the kind that you are against, as conceivable as through an Islamic system. The only difference is, and I'll explain to you how I can prove this, the only difference is with the Islamic system, there was an inbuilt mechanism that made it as an objective of the Sharia to do away with slavery as an institution. There is no inbuilt mechanism within liberalism which persuades political leaders to do the same thing. And if there was, then my question is, historically, how comes we didn't see that? How comes the founding fathers of America all owned slaves? Do you think that they were illiterate in the field and understanding of liberalism? George Washington had slaves, you see? I mean, was he an illiterate person? Did he not know? He was the one who was taking in the liberal ideas. So not only were liberal philosophical thinkers justifying colonialism, which is a kind of slavery, by the way, because colonialism is like slavery, to be honest with you, yes? They were justifying it. They were giving their governments the go-ahead, the philosophical go-ahead. But then you had those political leaders who would act upon that, and the populace, the masses, the liberal, secular, humanist masses that would act upon that. So I think it's a little bit unfair. I think you must admit it's unfair to say, well, after all this reform that the white man has done, which in fact it wasn't reform but was exploitation for 400, 500 years, now, and we forced you Muslims to free your slaves. No, it wasn't like that. What happened was that you put us into slavery, you colonized us, and then after that you realized for economic reasons that slavery was not something which was tenable, maintainable, or sustainable in the economic system, and that's why in America there was a war, because the South was benefiting more than the Northeast in terms of economic slavery, and because the Industrial Revolution was taking a turn and certain economic things were happening. So the reason why abolition of slavery took place was not because the white man realized that slavery was incompatible with humanism, secularism, or liberalism, was because the white man couldn't afford slavery anymore. That was the reason why slavery ended. Nothing to do with liberalism, my friend. Trust me, they used liberalism as a way to colonize people, as a justification for it. John Locke, J.S. Mill, all of those people were in charge of advising governments how to deal with the colonized, how to deal with the black man. David Hume was a racist.
Okay,
Immanuel Kant.
Can we deal with some of the claims you've made so far? Because if you make like 30 claims, I might forget some of the earlier ones.
But do you retract that statement that, okay, because this trajectory, sorry to say, but this white man's history, that we must be the white savior that saved you Muslims from enslaving those individuals, enslaved you, developing people and brown people, from annihilating yourselves and destroying and exploiting the world, when in fact we know that the white man was responsible to a large extent, not all white people of course, but the Western elite was responsible for this institution, and it was done in a way which, oh, if only they had taken in some of the Islamic principles.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So we follow the good ideas that they had, and where those ideas were even hypocritical to their actions, we the good ideas will stand by themselves. Okay. So good ideas with respect to kind of human rights and with respect to abolitionists and respect to humanist values.
Yes.
Those are what are followed by liberals today. Okay.
There's a reverb
and as for the
I'll speak to him. Sure. Yeah.
As for like whether I should take back this idea that kind of the Western world kind of encouraged Muslim countries to abolish slavery, that's what happened. That's the actual truth.
No, the actual truth. The Quran done that 1400 years ago.
Then why were you so slow? Then why were Muslim countries so slow to the mark then? Because if your Muslim countries, you had more Islam in your minds and being acted out than Westerners, so you should have had a head start towards abolishing slavery compared to the West, and yet it didn't happen that way. Like it was the Ottoman Empire first abolished it, and then after the Ottoman Empire was disestablished, various previous Ottoman countries like Egypt and like Saudi Arabia and like Iraq kind of like started doing slavery again, and then they later kind of started making it illegal in the 1920s or the 1960s, again under pressure of the rest of the world at that point. So that's maybe you're going to say, oh, but that has nothing to do with Islam, but I think it probably does, because it's a continuation of this culture and example of Muhammad and his rightly guided caliphs and his companions and the Sahaba, of what they did. Okay, and what were some of the other claims that you made? Well, yeah, basically, kind of, I'll agree with you that the American founding fathers and several other people in kind of European history, they had ideas that are totally objectionable and awful, but we aren't obligated to follow them. That isn't how kind of liberalism works. And I contrast it at this point with Islam, because I'd say that unlike liberalism, Islam is a cult of personality where you are obliged to try and defend every single action or teaching that Muhammad is reported to have done. Like I've seen in this park countless times, where they try and say, oh, when the Muslims enslaved the Banu Mustalik, they were doing it for their own good, to protect them from the harsh desert environments,
I don't know about
that sort
those
of thing.
discussions.
Still, it's like under the Islamic kind of. The verse is like, oh, you are of most exalted character, talking about Muhammad, or we have given you an excellent example in Muhammad. Like, kind of Muslims take this as dogma that, we need to, every time we find a new piece of evidence of something Muhammad did, we need to try and defend it. So if there's evidence that Muhammad did ethnic cleansing, for example, when he ordered all the Jews... But
now you're flogging a dead horse.
No, you did a bit of flogging yourself, so I think you should allow me as well.
Yeah, but I agree with you that we defend the Prophet, and I agree with you that...
Then you'll end up defending. Then you'll end up defending
let me just finish off the.
Then you'll end up defending ethnic cleansing as well, because that's something else that Muhammad did.
No, that's
okay. And I'll prove it. It's easy, and that's so easy to prove. That's even easier than. It's just as easy to prove that Muhammad did ethnic cleansing as it is to prove that he practiced slavery.
So James,
there's one more point though.
But I did let you speak for a while. So
and I let you speak for a while as well. But
okay, do you want to continue?
The one more point is that
go on.
You often use the term like, you the white man, we the brown man, like skin color is irrelevant in this discussion.
No, it's not irrelevant.
It is irrelevant.
No, it's not irrelevant when you have 400 years of black slavery.
No, it's irrelevant in this discussion. No, it is.
No, it's not irrelevant.
It's about the ideas.
It was all about skin color when it came to slavery. Of course it's relevant.
When I said
how can we have
Western countries...
James.
Listen to the whole point.
Don't say it's irrelevant.
When I said that Western countries persuaded Muslim countries to finally abolish slavery...
They didn't persuade anyone. They didn't persuade it. They were colonizing
that's what happened.
They were colonizing them.
They made an organization to abolish slavery.
I think, James...
Don't interrupt me, man.
No, but
the point is that
go ahead,
even if those Western countries were black, or even if those Western countries were purple, it would be the same difference. So there isn't that much point in mentioning white and black unless you want to like arouse kind of like tribalistic mentality, or like try and arouse the crowd, play the crowd, and say, oh, you the white man, oh, you the this and that. So it's not. Do
you mind if I come back and answer you? Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So you made a few good points, and I want to answer some of them. Right. the first thing that you said was that we don't have to defend personalities like John Locke or Immanuel Kant or John Stuart Mill or Voltaire or Montesquieu or whoever you want. Yeah. And I agree with you that you're not obliged as a liberal to do that. However, what you have to understand is that within liberalism, there are principles. And those principles tell us what's possible, what's probable, what's conceivable. Now, what I mean by that is that in contractarian liberalism, the idea of a social contract is central. Okay, so the idea that was first promoted by Thomas Hobbes in the Leviathan, the idea that you have a mass population that cede legitimacy to a sovereign master who then can universalize a law. Now, this is a principle of liberalism. In fact, you could go as far as to argue that without this social contract, liberalism would not exist.
Okay.
No, yeah, I've let you speak for some time.
Sure.
Let me tell you why. The reason why is because, of course, if you don't have a government with legitimacy and a mandate, from a liberal perspective, then it could easily fall into anarchy, right? So it will change ideology, because anarchy is a distinctive ideology to liberalism. So from that perspective, I'm not quoting John Stuart Mill, or say, for instance, John Locke, who was the founding father of liberalism, to show you, look how bad his ideas were, and therefore look what you're trying to defend. No, I'm showing you his principles, which are agreed upon by almost every other contractarian liberal that came after him. So if you consider yourself a liberal and you're espousing human rights values, which of course are an extension of the liberal project, then you have to then you have to accept that there are principles which allow for your ideology to churn out certain net results. So for instance, the case of, I've made this case before about apostasy, yes? When I said that John Locke said that you can kill an apostate, yes? You can kill, if it was a Christian country, you can, or a Jewish country, for example, you can kill an apostate because the country is known in that way, and it's not seen as an illiberal thing to do, to kill an apostate from that perspective. I'm not saying that that's John Locke's view, and therefore all liberals think that. I'm saying that John Locke reckoned principally, based on the abstract principles of liberalism, and in particular social contract theory, which almost, like I said, all the contractarians believe in, that such a death penalty for apostasy is conceivable through liberalism. And I'm saying the same thing. I'm saying slavery, colonialism, and all of those things, it should not be assumed, because here's the narrative that has to be shut down straight away. The narrative is you have human rights, and you mentioned the human rights document, human rights like the freedom of religion, the freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Let me tell you something very important. This is very important, James, and I want you to remember it for the rest of your life.
Okay,
honestly,
I probably will.
Okay, listen. And faith or speech is the extent to which the liberal government, through social contract, determines what is the acceptable freedom of expression, what is the acceptable freedom of speech, and what is the acceptable freedom of religion. That is why it was conceivable for the greatest liberal minds to say atheists shouldn't be in our society, like John Locke said. The reason why he said that was more to do with his own personal views, with more to do with the principles of liberalism itself than his own personal views. Therefore, going back to the idea of slavery, you're saying that you have these articles, which are the 30 articles written in 1948 about human rights. I'm saying to you that despite those articles, it's still conceivable and possible and probable that within a liberal framework, abstractly and in action, as we have seen through history, that you can have slavery and colonialism and exploitation and so on. It's not against liberalism. Therefore, if you're coming to say to me, look, here's the trajectory, you know, these Muslim countries have been forced. The reason why Muslim countries in the 1900s may have been forced to do anything is because in 1904, a few Western countries owned 85% of the world. They were the slaves themselves. Of course, so this is the irony of all ironies. You're saying that the Western countries forced Muslims to free slaves. They had them as slaves. This is the most ridiculous.
Not at the same time, though.
Yes, at this time. You said 1920. No. I'm saying that there was colonized people at that time. There were slaves at that time, and even though it was legally stopped in 1867 in America, it continued and continues to this day. That's why there is a Anti-Slavery Act, 2010, and every year they produce a report talking about how many people are human trafficked. Yeah. This is in this country. so slavery hasn't ended. What I'm saying is that from an Islamic perspective, you said that the impetus to free slaves from an Islamic perspective was a liberal, humanist, secular, Western one. I'm saying no, the impetus was not a humanist, liberal, secular one. It was originally a Quranic one. What's the evidence? Chapter 90 of the Quran says, وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا فَكُّ رَقَبَةٍ. It says, what is the good way?
Okay.
Listen, it says, what is the good way? Freeing slaves is the good way. So you can't tell me that, no, the white man told us what morality is, and that they're the ones who told us that, freeing slaves was a bad thing. We had inbuilt within our system a whole method, a maqsad, objective of freeing slaves. But it did so in a way which would be economically conducive to those people at that time, and would not collapse the international or national economies like what happened in America with the American Civil War. And it wasn't. It was a failed experiment, and slavery continues to this day. So what I'm trying to put to you today, and to end off, of course, James, is that this idea that now, sorry to say, but race doesn't matter or color doesn't matter, I think is also a false one, because the reason why I objected to that is because the slavery that existed, which was specific to the West, was a racist slavery. When the white man, okay, and I'm going to say that you can underline it with 100 letters. When the white man decided to go to Western Africa and take those guys in Western Africa and put them in their cotton fields in Southern America, part of the reason of justification for that is because they thought their white skin was in fact made them more superior to this black guy. Otherwise, why didn't they go to somewhere else in the world? Why did they go to West Africa in particular? It wasn't just a convenient trade route. It's because they found opportunity and justification through racism. So you can't say race doesn't matter there, man. Race, of course, look at the Empire records. They were mentioning race themselves. Like, we are the white, this and that, and biblical justifications, talking about Genesis chapter 20, when they talk about Noah's son, all that stuff. I can find you all of that stuff. So race matters, it's part of the discourse. I think it's disingenuous to say it doesn't. James, go ahead.
Okay, cool. So again, there's I think you maybe made at least 4 points, so I might kind of forget to address one because you've been talking for a while. So if that's the case, then hopefully SC Dawa will allow me to actually publish a comment below the video, because normally
let him finish, because he's going to say that he didn't.
Yeah, because
What you want. So what?
Okay.
And what?
Yeah.
All right, we've still
Okay,
we've got some other.
Well, anyway, so if I forget to.
Here. Hijab.
Okay, let him finish, because so it doesn't seem disingenuous.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
But this is why I say it makes sense to you.
Well, no, not really. There are lots
You
of.
nearly got you there. Oh yeah, no.
I was just, that
Come
was
on,
a mistake.
James. I think we can be fair. We can be fair with each other now. I think there's a lot of.
Is there a lot of truth in what I said? No, come on. Let me actually make my rebuttal. Don't just kind of try and.
It doesn't have to be a rebuttal. We can agree.
Yeah, but it's a rebuttal because you've said several things that are unreasonable and wrong, and that needs to be corrected.
Go ahead.
And so what I was just going to say is that, I might have forgotten one of the things that you said just now, because you did make 5 or 6 points over that time. So I'll try and address them all. And if I do forget one, then I'll leave a comment underneath SC Dawa, as long as they don't block my comments, which they normally do. Okay. Anything that refutes you is a load of rubbish. Yeah, anything that refutes is a load.
You said in a comment, you said that. You said, read a book, you idiot. You did that, yes or no?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, why?
Because he probably said something stupid.
Yeah,
That's not blocking though, is it?
Right,
That's not blocking.
let him come back.
Okay. First of all, so we need to talk. So liberalism, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So liberalism did start in the 1800s, and those were
No, it didn't. It started in the 1600s.
Okay, whatever. But
Late
you know,
1600s,
classical liberalism, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
often kind of. Sometimes it gets called as. It's often
Locke
like
died
seen
1706.
as in a kind of laissez-faire way. It often gets aligned with right-wing economics, and it
Yes.
means freedom, but normally for freedom for people who own things, own this capital power.
Yeah.
Okay, and so the trajectory,
Yes.
as it kind of goes towards modern day,
Yes.
you still see kind of neoliberals who kind of focus on the capitalist aspects and would agree with the founding fathers, and some of them might even still agree with slavery and that sort of thing. But kind of when people talk about liberals nowadays, they often mean this kind of left-wing group of people who
Yeah, we're not
kind of
talking about
focus on kind of compassion,
Tolerance.
empathy, tolerance,
Yeah,
and these other values, okay?
yes.
And so the way that was born out from this kind of like classic liberal
Yes.
is because kind of there was this idea of like the individual being supreme, and that if we're all equal as individuals, then
Yes.
what would be the most benevolent way for us to interact, and those sorts of considerations, okay? And so if anything, I would advocate for that. And if and you said like you're talking about like what is likely or what is possible or under this kind of under liberalism,
Yeah.
and you're still at that point talking about this kind of kind
Yeah.
of capitalist almost version of liberalism, this kind of like a
Yeah.
very classic John Locke style version of liberalism, and you
I would
talked
say
about
capitalism more Adam Smith. I mean, the
yeah, but-
invisible hand of the
okay,
economy and all
and-
that stuff.
and- well, yeah, okay, he's there.
supply
he's
side
there, he's there,
economics.
but
Go ahead, go ahead.
other liberal speakers kind of lend themselves to that to some degree.
Go ahead.
And so when you talk about the social contract and like kind of the social contract is an idea for justifying why the state has authority to make laws. Okay,
Yes.
but so saying that the state kind of has authority to make a law, providing a theory for why the state has an authority to make a law,
Yes.
isn't the same as saying any law made by a state is a good law, okay? And
Yeah,
so
okay.
there are different within like this body of ideas that might be called liberal, in particular the ones that emphasize empathy and universal rights for human beings. You could say like those people wouldn't have to say, oh, due to social contract theory, you can't say anything against that apostasy law because the state has the authority by the social contract. No, that's not true. You can say that a law is a bad law, but still
Yes.
say that this state can make a law. Okay, it has the power to do that, or it has the authority to do that. But you can still criticize the law and say it's a bad law. And so slavery would be a bad law, and apostasy, like killing people just for changing their religion and saying I don't believe in this religion anymore, that is a bad law. That's kind of the punishment doesn't meet the crime. It's sick and it's just barbaric and awful. Okay, and then and now this is where I kind of might forget like exactly all the points you made before. What did you say after that? Can you remember any of the other things you said after that?
I can't remember.
You don't want to help me about that.
No,
okay. I'll
please.
continue. I'll try my best to remember as well.
Well,
Anyway.
I talked
But
about the racial part. I think.
Okay,
Yeah,
there was something a little. Can you remember what was one before the racial part?
We talked about. We talked about Esau race. I can't remember, man. And the
Okay.
chronology. I talked about the fact that principles. You've covered this, right? So in principle, it's possible. It's conceivable.
Oh yeah. Okay, great. And so let's talk about So you raised. Is it possible for a liberal society to kind of end up introducing an apostasy law? And so what I would say is we need to compare how likely it is for a Western society today to start introducing laws like apostasy or like slavery again, and then say, are they more or less likely to do that than a society that takes its principles and its guidance directly from Muhammad's example and his teachings? And so if you weighed that up, which is more likely to do so, I think you'd definitely find that it is the Islamic society that takes its guidance from there
Right.
that would be more likely to reintroduce apostasy and would be more likely to reintroduce
James,
slavery.
I get what you're saying,
Because
but I think you misunderstood the argument,
Because
though.
there are like
I get what you're saying,
there
but I
are
think-
scholars like Salih Fawzan, who's one of the senior kind of scholars, one of the senior scholars of Saudi Arabia, and principal of rather like professor of Islamic sciences at in Medina. And he says that slavery is part of Islam and will always be a part of Islam, and you can buy his book of Islamic jurisprudence, and he will say the same thing in there. And so
No, but I think they asked him. That was one of the people on my survey, actually. If Salih Al-Fawzan.
yeah, and unless he's changed his
No, no,
opinion, unless he's changed his opinion,
No,
has he-
I'll tell you what I'll come back to that because.
Okay.
But what I will say to you before, can I just say a few things?
Well,
You misunderstood something.
there's one
more
other
thing.
thing. There's one other thing. So
yeah.
about like kind of the race of whether it's relevant in this discussion. Like it depends what we're trying to achieve in this discussion. Like if we're trying to like think about what would be best for the future, then I don't think it is relevant for this discussion.
Okay,
I think
James,
if we're talking about what's best for society in the future,
Yeah.
then I don't think it is relevant to like kind of pour it over and say
Yeah,
like kind
yeah.
of like racial issues. I
Yes.
mean, obviously, like kind of we need to safeguard against racism,
Yeah.
but like
Yeah.
you can do that without saying oh, you saying that as a white man, that's pretty rich, or
I didn't say it like that.
It had that kind of tone earlier on.
If I meant it like that, I apologize.
Okay, and so and
you're right. Your colour has nothing to.
And the
Yeah.
let's see what else.
Yeah. Is there anything else?
No, so I know. I think we just need to. I do want to conclude with, like, if you're going to take. Yeah, which is going to be the more firm and sound kind of set of principles instead of guidelines and norms and legal system to build a just society in the future and a fair society in the future? Is it going to be kind of the current norms in Western society today and documents like the United Nations human rights document?
Yeah.
Is that going to be the better basis, or
Yes.
is kind of Islamic scripture going to be the better basis? I think it's very easy to show that the Islamic culture is inferior to producing equitable, fair, free, tolerant society that doesn't allow slavery and doesn't allow people to be murdered just for changing their
James,
religion.
can I come back at a few points, because I think what you've done there, you've done a really good job in trying your best, okay? And honestly, I have to give you credit, because
you also mentioned kind of like the narrative of whether it was kind of the Western countries who coerced and pressured and advised Muslim countries to actually abolish slavery, and you said, oh no, that's rubbish. And I think kind of like, history will.
I didn't say that was
that
rubbish.
wrong.
No, I said that the time you're talking about was ironically a time where Western countries had been colonizing the Muslim countries.
Okay, yeah,
that's what I said.
Here's the thing though.
And you agree with
but
that.
here's the thing though. Like, kind of, you can say that the Western countries in like 1850, they did all these bad things. So who are they to say to Muslim countries
that's not my argument. That's
to
not
do
my
bad
argument.
things? But
That's
we can still take the good things that they did.
No.
Which Muslim countries were slow to
James,
do.
fair enough.
And so you still need
Fair enough.
if you're going to make the case that it is an Islamic doctrine to end slavery because of this verse in kind of the Quran that says that kind of some of the zakat money should go towards freeing slaves, then you need to try and account for why it is that Muslim countries ended up being so much slower than Western countries to do so.
I haven't allowed you to speak, so I think I have to say, you've tried your best, and based on you've tried your best, and you have made some points. Although you've made some equivocations, and I have to point them out.
Okay.
First equivocation that you made, you used the word good and bad. Now, good and bad on a liberal basis depends on what's legitimate and illegitimate, what's acceptable, what's non-acceptable, what's mandated and what's not mandated. So if I say it's acceptable, it's mandated and legitimate on political liberalism that you can have slaves, for instance, and I can make that argument using the social contract. If I say it's legitimate, it's acceptable and so on liberalism, on political liberalism, to have colonies, right? Just like John Stuart Mill would agree with me, just like John Locke would agree with me, just like Immanuel Kant would agree with me, just like Montesquieu would agree with me, just like the American founding fathers would agree with me, the writers of the Federalist Papers would agree with me, and so on and so forth. Then it's a different case to make, because when you say good and bad, now good and bad is defined by liberalism if you're a liberal. Now you have different kinds of liberalism. So you have political liberalism. Now what's desirable on political liberalism might be differentiated, by the way, by what is desirable on social liberalism, okay? And I'll give you an example of that. Like utilitarian-based liberalism, the type of which that John Stuart Mill defended and wrote a book called On Utilitarianism. In chapter 4, he talked about how to prove it's called proving utilitarianism. And then he talked about that which is desirable, which makes you happy, is that which is good. That's what he said. So if you talk about social liberalism, having a slave on social liberalism could only be objected to on the basis of the harm principle. Now, if there's a structure, a politically legitimized structure on liberalism, of colonialism, for instance, which entails a kind of exploitation or slavery, in essence, that could be acceptable both on political liberalism and on social liberalism. So I think the idea here, because there's two things we're doing. We have to look at the principles, and then we have to look at the history, okay? Now, the history might not always be in line with the principles and vice versa. It could be the case that in abstraction, in philosophical abstraction that the principles allow these things to happen, but that in historical reality those things did not happen, and vice versa. Now what I'm saying to you, I'm putting to you, is that there is nothing, for example, in liberalism which abolishes or does anything to do with racism. There were many liberals racists, and there's nothing within liberalism, social liberalism, political liberalism, or any kind of economic liberalism. Can you stop messing around, please? Sorry. Or political liberalism, which says, for example, racism is wrong. So if someone wants to predicate an exploitation or economic relationship on a racial system, on liberalism, then that could be justified philosophically in abstraction. There's nothing, and that's why you find up until Winston Churchill, you have racist people in this country and other countries in the West. Why? Because there's nothing within their worldview which stops racism. They were forced to be multicultural when they begged, the second world countries that they once colonized, subjects from those countries, to come back into the country so that they can build their infrastructure. And they knew that they had to get along with them in order to make societies work. That's why racism was seen as bad. It's nothing to do with liberalism. It's nothing to do with human rights. Because human rights is an extension of liberalism. And in fact, I can't even recall in the human rights document that which explicitly condemns, this kind of attitude, inherent attitude within a human being. So the point I'm making to you is this, is if I said slavery is a good thing, as a liberal, you couldn't even refute that statement if I believe that to be the case. You can't say that's good and that's bad, because good and bad is something which is determined by the mechanisms that different liberal philosophers put down. And you can't prove philosophically that that is bad according to colonization is bad, slavery, exploitation, relation. In fact, you could argue that the kind of supply side economics that you once referred to, that was espoused by people like Adam Smith, and that was objected to by people like John Maynard Keynes, who of course had this different model, and so on. That kind of liberalism actually facilitates the exploitational relationships, which you could argue compound what, I'm not going to use these terms, but this relationship with surplus value. Marx calls it surplus value, right? So the idea of the worker and all that kind of stuff. Exploitation happens in capitalism. So you can even make an economic case against liberalism and say, look, this is what's happening now with the IMF bank, which is legitimate from economic liberal perspective, where they're giving the African subcontinental countries these big loans that they can't pay back, and that's effectively putting half the population into slavery. And now they have to do this and that and the other in order to pay them back. It might not be direct slavery, but it's an economically sanctioned slavery of exploitation, capitalistic exploitation, which is legitimate on economic liberalism, sanctioned by political liberalism, and not contradicted by social liberalism. Therefore, we have to be honest. What we're saying is that I think you have this trajectory of, okay, the white saviorism complex, that the white man came with his Western ideas to help us brown people understand what true morality was and what isn't, is actually a false notion on liberalism, because there's nothing inherent, nothing which inheres within that philosophy which objects to racism, which objects to exploitation, which objects to colonialism, and so on. So I think that the argument is a flawed one. It's a good attempt to refute me, but it wasn't a philosophically satiating one.
Excellent attempt.
Yeah, it was a good try. It was a nice try. But what I will say to you is that in Islam, I'll repeat this: we're not apologists to the liberal world, because I said to you, I'm quoting scholars from the medieval world before, like Al-Ghazali, who I quoted, died 1111. Yes, he died 1111. He wrote a book called Al-Mustasfa, talking about the usul and this and that and the objects of Sharia. He himself said in parts of his works that slavery, the objective of it is to do away with it. Yes, he said this. This is not a response to the liberal that's forcing us to say this. No, we said this before John Locke even lived. This was 500 or 600 years before John Locke. So the point is, the systems were in place. We have a justifiable moral reason to say that freeing slaves is a good thing, and that's what the Quran says. وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْعَقَبَةُ فَكُّ رَقَبَةٍ. What is the good way? Freeing slaves. That's the Quran. You don't have any alternative liberal reason to say that slavery is wrong. If there is one, or exploitation is wrong, or colonialism is wrong, or that freeing the slave is a good thing, I would like to hear it.
Okay, yeah, of course.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would like to hear it.
And so, like the two main points he made, or like just to summarize the points that I've noted down. He talks about racism in Islam versus liberalism. He talks about slavery in Islam versus liberalism.
Yeah.
And you said that kind of.
No, I also
and
talked
you also
about-
mentioned Al-Ghazali at the very end.
No,
So-
I talked about something which you missed out, which is very important, which was actually the crux of my argument.
Okay.
I said that you were saying you were using the words good and bad. Yes.
Okay.
This is a good law. Apostasy is a good law. This is a bad law, or whatever. I'm saying good and bad is that which is conceivable and acceptable and legitimate within liberalism.
Okay.
You have to address this point. How can you say that as a liberal, you believe that killing the apostate is wrong when actually political, social, and economic liberalism does not object to it from a principle perspective? I'm not talking about John Locke just because he said it was wrong. I'm using him as a supplementary evidence. My question is, from a structurally philosophical perspective, how can you prove that killing the apostate in a state which claims to be, say, for example, Christian or Jewish, is wrong on liberalism?
Okay, great. So the thing is, your conception of liberalism is anachronistic because you're only looking at the kind of 200-year-old liberal thinkers, and then you've constructed this idea of liberalism that hasn't advanced whatsoever. Okay, and so yes, it's true that back in those times there were people who at the same time were like espousing ideas of like kind of the sanctity of the individual and like being individualist, but then also were being contradictory in terms of slavery and racism and so on and so forth. Okay, but we're not beholden to those people. Okay, and so if you
I agree with that.
Yeah, and so your concept of like you're a liberal, so why don't you think like these people 200 years ago?
I didn't say
is
people. I
invalid.
said, sorry,
it is invalid
that's a
because
straw man argument. I said
it isn't, because
the structures, the principles,
you've taken
the
this
structure of
concept-
social contract.
because you've taken this conception
But James,
of liberalism.
but
That's
that's not my
applicable
argument.
today.
That's not my
Because
argument.
then you talk about liberals today.
What is liberalism?
It depends.
Okay, is liberalism social contract? Can you have liberalism without social contract? Yes or no?
I don't know.
If you take away a social contract from liberalism, you have anarchy, okay? It becomes a different ideology. I'm saying the existence of social contract allows for the universality of law to triumph over and above the individual's right to, let's say, for instance, freedom of expression.
No, but you can take this liberal
That's
idea.
my argument.
No, but you can take this individual idea of liberalism, of the the sacred individual, and that you shouldn't infringe on other people's freedom, and then extrapolate from that towards a kind of minarchist or anarchist society where
That's
people
not liberalism. Then we've left liberalism.
You've left what you.
So you have to reject your ideology.
Yeah, no, but the thing.
So you agree with me then?
No, I don't agree with you because like because if what you're trying to do is debunk kind of 200-year-old people,
I'm
then
not
that's
doing that.
great. Because
I'm not
you aren't
doing that.
debunking anyone today. You aren't debunking
Yes,
kind of
I am.
people who like value
You don't understand the argument. I'm not doing that. I'm saying that all liberal contractarian, by definition, thinkers, they have to believe in a social contract.
No, but
saying
but
go
then,
to
then you're,
us
but
and
then
I'm saying
you're
that
talking
in-
about,
in
but those
principle-
people hardly exist today, though.
No, any liberal that lives now, whether they're constitutional,
No,
whatever.
really, because you called them social liberals before. Could you define that?
No. I'm saying that
people
any
people
liberal-
who from this idea of the individual being having rights, which would be considered like in some respects a liberal idea, they have like from that kind of gained these ideas of a kind of fairness and kind of what's the word, not entropy, enthalpy, the word empathy. Yeah, they've gained empathy, like treating people the way that you would like to be treated, and so on and so forth. And what you're saying doesn't apply to them whatsoever.
I'm saying you're not understanding the argument.
You've managed to.
Can you have a political liberalism?
You've managed to knock down like kind of
No,
some
you don't.
people in the 1800s who had like contradictory ideas
1800s.
and still managed to like
Forget about those people. I'm asking a simple question.
then let's forget about them.
I have one question. Is it possible to have a political liberalism without a social contract?
I don't know.
No, okay. No. Don't attack him too much.
Yeah.
If you have a non-contractarian understanding of liberalism, which you want to promote to us, then you can do that. But what I'm saying is that my argument is it's not actually possible to have a non-contractarian version of political liberalism and maintain a full liberal character. You cannot be a liberal without believing in a social contract. You will slip into an anarchy. That's my idea, which means you have no government. You might as well kill it, everyone kill it. It's the law of the jungle then. So I'm saying without social contract, there is no government, there is no authority, there is no sovereign, there is no universality of law. Therefore, what is pertinent to a liberal discourse is a social contract, a political liberalism. If you're saying that, you don't know, but I'm saying to you, this is my argument, that it's not possible to have a political liberalism without a social contract. If that is the case, then the laws that are sanctioned by the political authority or the sovereign, the laws that are sanctioned by that authority and become universalized by law, they are legitimate. They are the good thing. They are what is seen as good by liberalism.
No, this is still kind of totally anachronistic, though.
It's not anachronistic. I'm not talking.
It is.
No, it's not anachronistic.
No, because people who would say I'm a liberal today,
yes,
they would value things like reducing human harm and people having equal rights under the law. So
yes, okay.
you're leaving out these parts of the equation in order to be like, aha, under liberalism there is no objection to slavery. But obviously that's nonsense, isn't it?
No, now you're strawmanning the argument. I didn't say that. I didn't say under liberalism. I didn't say that.
Who do you think you're refuting by saying?
No.
If you take this kind of like conception.
You project all the time onto the past too. Is that not also under?
What do you mean project onto the past?
Well, you use principles and ideas that are here, and then you project that onto the past. You do that also.
What do you mean?
Really
be specific.
No, well, you're saying to him that he's looking at liberalism, and then he's 200 years ago, and he's projecting his ideas on what liberalism is today.
You're doing the same.
You do this. You do that.
Yeah,
every Sunday.
but like I have permission to do that by Salafis who say that the ideal form. But by the ideal form of of government was kind of this 7th century Medinan.
No, but
period.
that's a misrepresentation
Yeah.
of.
How is it?